Thanks, Nathan, for having me, and it's always great to meet with people that probably know a lot more about programming than I do. My background's more in photography and writing, and probably more of a filmmaker at heart, but I've heard somebody told me once that you should always go where your fear is, and that's kind of programming for me, so I'm trying to get more engaged with that. And one thing that's really interested me is there's been a couple of things that have happened kind of at the same time in my life. In 2011, I started using the public transportation system in Orlando, which, has anybody ever been on the Lynx bus here? Okay, so it's an interesting experience, and it's been an interesting experience for me to be a pedestrian and a transit rider in primarily a car town. And so it's been making me think a lot about Orlando as a system and being its usability for someone who's trying, like me, who's trying to connect to the landscape in a different way than a lot of other people are. But at the same time that happened, I was starting to see a lot of geosocial applications emerge, like Foursquare, and for people that might be aware of gay culture, there was a geosocial kind of cruising app called Grindr, so that people could connect with each other if gay men wanted to meet one another. So and then also Instagram, and I'm a photographer, so I became really interested in this idea of how I can almost use smartphone as a way to survive in the city as a pedestrian in a place that's not really meant for me to be in. And there's actually a phrase called dangerous by design that was coined by Transportation for America because Orlando is considered the most dangerous city in the country for pedestrians. But that's a really compelling phrase to me because it kind of presents opportunity as well, I think, to be creative and really explore how there's an overlap between the architecture of information systems in the region, but also the architecture of the actual urban design and street layouts and whatnot. So my tagline is gaming hostile urban landscapes through play. And I've been reading a lot of game theory because I'm working on my thesis year with the emerging media, Master of Fine Arts, digital media concentration. And so for a couple of years, been looking at serious games and the serious games movement. And, some people are like, well, what really makes the game serious? But there is an interesting idea of using games to think systemically about social issues. And there's several cultural anthropologists that have been looking at how can you use a game to really kind of put yourself in someone's situation and see how agency and structure interact with each other. And then the Games for Change movement. Has anybody been to the Games for Change Festival in New York City? It happens every year, and I've been to two, and it's really cool because they bring game designers in from around the world that are working on a lot of different projects that tend to be funded by grants and whatnot. Everything from STIs or sexually transmitted diseases to poverty to just helping improve education in the classroom. There's a lot of really cool initiatives. And then the idea of urban mobile games, which isn't completely new, and some of it, at least with some of the things I've read, is also related to how people, artists, and also particularly theater, has acted out oppression and whatnot, and tried to simulate it. And so with urban mobile games, there's been people that have done it playfully, but also some people that have kind of simulated social issues and whatnot by creating games where they're navigating actual physical spaces. And I'm really interested in the idea of Adia, or I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but it's meant to be a more loosely based idea of gaming, so it's more play and less like the traditional Ludos, which is very rigid game rules and whatnot. And also, how can games be also an art form? And these are two games that I found out about in one of my classes. They were both created in using processing. One is called The Marriage, and it's by Rod Uncle, and then the other is Passing by Jason Roark. Have you guys ever heard of either one of those games? And they got me thinking about how games don't have to be like World of Warcraft or just the spectacle of really complex graphics and whatnot. Those could be great games. You could also kind of do this retro idea of maybe it might be more accessible for people that want to experiment with coding language and how systems work to influence their artwork and whatnot. And then I think I said this before that I'm interested in the geosocial urban spaces. There's this idea of co-presence where we're kind of mapping our social networks onto physical landscapes now. So if anybody checked in here at MB Labs, you're leaving this digital trace, but you're also here physically. So the idea of being physically and virtually present in the same space. And I mean, mobility is not a new concept, but it's interesting to think about mobility now with co-presence. So I'm kind of thinking about this idea of geosociability and like how can people actually get around literally in their physical world, but also through information technology. And that's really interesting with public transit because I found my smartphone to be really empowering to use a pretty subpar transit system. But because of how seems to be socioeconomic forces, at least in Orlando, you probably have limited means if you're riding the bus, which means you might have limited means to even have a smartphone. So like, it's interesting to think about, so you wouldn't necessarily be able to use the tool that might help make your experience better. And I've already talked about the Dangerous by Design concept. The other thing that's going on that I just wanted to mention is we're doing the Transit Interpretation Project. Nathan's also participating, and if anybody is interested, we're having artists, writers, concerned citizens, whoever is interested to get involved, basically go on the Lynx bus system and explore, kind of document their experiences and think about a creative project that they could possibly do about public transportation and mobility in Orlando. We just had an article in the Weekly and have these really cool t-shirts for $18 if anybody wants to buy them. And we have a Facebook page. And so far, we had about 40 people participate in the first phase of our project. And it was throughout the month of November, we had a different individual or a group of people go on a unique route and then come up with some concept or thing that they want to work on. And they didn't have a finished product, but throughout the month of November, they've been basically updating and saying, well, this is what I'm thinking about doing. So Nathan, he did a day 4. His title of his blog was Structure and System, and it was talking about just thinking about urban design in the sense of how can we really look at this as a structural problem and maybe be more creative and maybe use like some of the maps and tools that we have with Google Maps to explore maybe some new solutions for how we get around. We've had fashion designers and travel writers and photographers and a lot of other people participating. And my contribution was looking at maybe how game design can illuminate some of the barriers and challenges with the way Orlando is designed. And I was particularly interested in the sprawl of Colonial Drive. So I did a walking trek where I actually walked from Parliament House on Orange Blossom Trail to UCF. And I just took pictures and video. It's about a 6-hour walk. And I wanted to create a documentary game using the photographs and videos that I took so that if somebody else was interested to see what it might be like to go on that trek, they could experience that. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but this is a game that was really interesting to me. It's called Reactivism, and it came out of the Pet Lab and the Parsons New School for Design, and Games for Change. It was basically recreating social movements. It's an analog game, so it wasn't using the technology that it's a little bit more advanced with smartphones, but it was this idea of getting people out in the streets and recreating different social movements, getting them thinking about, connections with each other. I thought that was inspiring to think about what an urban mobile game could get you doing. And this was just in the New York Times recently. It was talking about, this game just came out, it's called Pork Like Money. And they titled it Where Film Marries Video Game. And so this kind of lies with what I'm interested in doing is how can you, if you're really interested in photography and video, maybe explore how game design could creatively exhibit and get people in that world that you documented. These are two I mentioned before, there's another game called Inside the Haiti Earthquake that I'm also interested in, you might want to check out. So what I'm looking at doing is a game called Deck Bear Walking, and I have an account that's basically like a gallery. I took 194 photographs and videos, and it's all up there, so it's like almost like a virtual gallery, so you can kind of see from beginning to end what my trek was like. But now I'm trying to think about how I can creatively create a game from that content that maybe helps people see the assets in a different way than just looking at an Instagram page. And one concept that I didn't mention yet that I think is really cool is phoner. Is anybody familiar with flannery? The idea of the wanderer of the modern city. I definitely look it up because it's kind of talking about, especially at the turn of the 20th century, as a lot of cities were becoming updated with this really grandiose architecture, people started to feel a little overwhelmed and almost engulfed by the new design of cities. And so there was a level of alienation that people felt, and they kind of talked about this concept of the flanner, or someone who was wandering the cityscape. But now they call them the phoner because it's like they're wandering the cityscape. They also are connecting with the information system as well through their smartphones. So it's like the 21st century postmodern flanner, which is, I think, is really cool to think about. I talked about this a little bit already, but just the idea that the city streets could basically become real-world game environments where people can simultaneously interact with each other and their environments online and offline in the physical urban landscape. I think that really creates the opportunity to engage people with the urban landscapes they live in and possibly collaboratively identify existing design problems and maybe look at potential solutions. So with the game that I'm looking at, it may not be quite going in that direction, but thinking about working on the outline for right now, first-person explorer and probably processing or PHP, but just to give you like a basic idea, I thought about simply just you're going on this mission to possibly as a journalist cover some photographs at Parliament House on Halloween. You have like a kit of things that you're taking with you, and these are actual photographs that I took before I went on my trek. And then you have to figure out how are you going to get there, and then there are different scenarios that can play out. And then if you're going to do that, this is the bus route, this is how you're going to do it. And I have video that kind of accompany that so that it actually can help maybe put people a little bit more in that situation and make it a little bit more realistic. So this is me writing links on the way there. So it'll be interesting because it's like you're playing it, but you're also experiencing exactly what I experienced too. Which, I don't know, people might not relate to it because it's not maybe as immersive because they're actually going through my experience versus embodied an avatar or whatnot. But hopefully it would maybe get people thinking about exploring the region as I did, but also thinking about concepts of design and how the environment is dangerous by design. So we'll be looking to raise awareness about transportation issues and mobility issues in the region, and possibly come up with some scenarios that you might have to deal with, like you don't have any money to get on the bus, but you have an iPad with you, but you're walking by a pawn shop. Do you go to the pawn shop and maybe pawn your iPad so that you have some money to get on the bus? I don't know. There might be some interesting things that happen with that. So I'm still like in the concept phase right now, but I'm probably in the next month or two really going to be starting to look at coding and some kind of choose your own adventure, base bare bones game that would use all of the assets that I have and see where it goes about. And that's pretty much the whole presentation. I'm going to go over 12 minutes. So, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, a couple minutes for questions. I wanted to ask, do you personally feel a positive or negatively about people having their phones and being attached to them as they walk through the city? Like we see a lot of kind of ironic photos and videos and making fun of the fact that we're all walking around with our heads down with
Yeah,
these
you know,
little
it's really
screens.
interesting. 'Cause I feel like it can be kind of an expression of class, you know, and like consumerism, which I remember this one time there was this guy who I think he was kind of transient, and I was like walking like this, and I think he lived in the street, and he didn't have a phone, and he was like, "Look up, sir!" And like totally called me out, and it like snapped me out. I'm like, "Oh my god, yeah, I guess I am kind of not looking at anything around me." I don't know, it's not really my place to judge other people. I just kind of think about how I'm doing it. I think I could probably be less glued to my phone, but I use my phone to take a lot of pictures of things. So that's, if I am on my phone a lot, it's because I'm photographing what's around me, not usually because I'm like, ugh. But I think that that is the other interesting thing that I'm thinking about is maybe all the games that I end up designing don't need to use technology and can be more analog so that it brings people out of that zombie-ish thing. It is a little weird when you watch it. Oh my god, everybody here is on
Before
the
the
phone right now.
prevalence of smartphones or phones or whatever in a big city, how much interaction was really going on between people anyhow? Like, are they actually interacting any less? Or are they just doing something more with their time while they're walking around?
Yeah, I saw a funny photo recently on the internet of New York City subway filled with people looking, reading the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and looking at each other, just totally buried in their newspaper.
Right.
So
you
it's
know,
not that
it's-
different. And I've been thinking about that. It's like, well, what would be the difference between looking at my phone versus reading a book or whatever? We'll do that too.
Right.
So, I don't know, but it's interesting because in New York, when you're on the subway, you can't really use your phone unless you have things that are offline. I don't know if they changed it, but the last time I was there,
Yeah,
you lose your
no
phone
signal.
connection. So it's like, if I don't have anything that I can use offline, then it's not that meaningful for me to trade on. So maybe I will pay a little bit more attention to what's
The
going
thing
on.
is, you're using your phone to increase your awareness of the environment rather than to go somewhere else. So what you're doing is quite different than reading a novel.
It's definitely a documentation and survival tool for me because it's like I use the Google Maps. I'm probably, I'm documenting what I'm seeing. I would say the phone really became a form of therapy for me because I did feel really, to an extent, still do feel pretty impressed, as someone who doesn't have a car that tries to get around. And I think taking pictures and video and kind of bearing witness to it helped me kind of like move through it a little bit better, So, yeah, I don't think it was as much as avoiding it, saying, "Oh my God, this is happening. This is kind of intense."
I saw similar application. Somebody was making it now with New York. That your phone, if you're walking somewhere, your phone buzzes if you shouldn't make that turn. Like if you go through one of the buildings, like it buzzes and okay, turn around better. It's not safe or whatever. So people mapped how like route throughout Manhattan, I think, or something.
Yeah.
I think there's actual app on the App Store for that. So that like few turns.
Like augmenting your knowledge of your.
Yeah, pretty much.
Crowdsourced.
It's not really, it's not the game application of it, but it's like the way to, I guess, to use the data that you experience to, yeah, okay, now this.
I actually think of the shareabouts thing that they have, where it's like you can create a shareabouts app and people can collaboratively say, hey, these bus stops need to be cleaned up, or like these are sites where you can recycle, and it's doing like geotagging and things like that.
It was another app, it was actual game, I think.
Oh, okay.
A couple of years ago, it was built on a Doom engine. All the game is you stay in line for 6 hours. So it's simulating staying there. So all you see is like a line, and you stay in it for 6 hours, and then eventually you get to the story. I don't know. But you can download and play. Maybe, I don't know. I didn't play it.
You're on a bus?
It might be similar application.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that. Because that was one thing I had a hard time when I was thinking about designing a game about public transit. Is like, do I want to simulate how freakishly long it takes to play?
Right.
Or do I want to kind of condense it so that you get some of the basic concepts? And that was,
You can go ahead and ask your question, I'm just gonna check in with our,
Your comment about a game where the transportation makes me think some offhand way of like Foley at home. Where you could crowdsource, people may be familiar, you could play this, what you could do your computer, but you could play a game and do puzzles, three-dimensional folding, And as I understand it, the gamers with that kind of mindset ended up solving problems that the researchers hadn't been able to solve before about the
Yeah.
protocol. So that kind of thinking in a crowdsource of gamers could maybe find a way to make the public transportation system better.
And I kind of feel like Trip's doing that a little bit already because, I mean, just talking to the Florida Department of Transportation, the city, everybody's blaming everybody else. Everybody's so removed in some ways from being able to think outside the box. You really do need to bring people in that aren't within the discipline to contribute and do that crowdsourcing.
And it might, I mean, it could be how to make it more efficient so you get there faster, but it could be things like how to make it a better experience or how to connect people more.
Yeah. So I feel like one simple thing, just putting Wi-Fi on the buses so that maybe, people at least while they're on the bus, they can
Get
be
something
connected. They can be connected. Because I do notice a lot of people that do have some sort of device, but it's expensive to have a data plan. So if you could at least have Wi-Fi, then maybe you'd be able to get connected and do a little bit more of. So I hope that's the direction we go when we're trying to bring in people to do more of that problem-solving kind of idea and think about it. But my game right now, I think, is a little bit more autobiographical, where it's like, okay, let's witness this experience of going through this sprawling, stretched out road. It's not really that pretty. It's not really that enjoyable to walk through and whatnot. Does anybody else have any questions?
We'll have a little bit of time at the end. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.